So Jane, enjoying Bordeaux. Bordeaux has this reputation for being jolly expensive, very grand wines. Let's start with what really matters. How do you find great value in Bordeaux?
Okay, so yes, I think people can be thrown off with the idea that Bordeaux is only about expensive wines, which couldn't be further from the actual truth of what is happening in Bordeaux. I think probably if you look at the whole production, there are maybe 6,500 today to 7,000 chateaux across the region. And sadly, for most of them, we're talking 500, which truly approach very, very high prices, which go on to sell in the secondary market, and which, those names that we think about. That leaves you a lot of margin for trying to find good value wines. Now, that doesn't mean that all the rest are good. There are some that really aren't good enough today and that don't have the money to invest. So my advice is look at the vintage. There are always, this is a big region, there are many, many different types of soils, many, many different ways of working. So try to match what is the quality of that specific vintage in terms of sun and rain and all the rest of the things that go up to making this vintage. Put it together with the soils. Certain areas, say limestone maybe is going to work very well, or deep gravels if it's a very hot, so if it's a very rainy vintage and you want to have drainage, or look for
clay if it's a very hot vintage.
If it's hot, exactly, you want to keep that freshness. So try and do a little bit of jigsaw puzzling and match those together. And like any region, there are certain families who really care, they're very present, and they do well. They'll be different every year, but they do well every year because they really take the time to follow their vines from beginning to end.
So hunt down the stories.
Hunt down the stories, hunt down the people that care, and don't be overwhelmed, I think is the big thing with Bordeaux, because there's so many estates.
And I think people often sort of forget that most of us only drink one bottle of wine at a time. So what I've found with my drinking is, the quality of Cru Bourgeois now is so good, below class growth levels in the Médoc, for example, or a similar level in Saint-Emilion. When you drink those wines on your own, you enjoy them every bit as much as a Cru Classé because you're giving it your full attention, and they're very rewarding wines.
I totally agree with you. And that goes with vintages as well. It's not about what's the best vintage, it's about what vintage is going to taste great today and with what you're drinking. So 2017 right now is a vintage which maybe is underestimated and we dismiss in many ways, because if we're doing it in a vertical, exactly like you say, okay, so it's not as concentrated as 15 or 16, but you taste it right now on its own. It's just so good. They're delicious. I've had some brilliant Saint-Emilions, 2017s, in the last couple of weeks, which are fantastic today.
Or lesser Pomerols as well, also fantastic in that vintage, it's quite right.
Yeah.
But another thing that people say about Bordeaux, a criticism that's often levelled at Bordeaux is, you have to wait so long. There's this, this idea that anything in a Bordeaux bottle, put it away for 10 years. Can't be right, can it?
I think there's two answers to that question. Well, there's probably a million, but let's stick with two. There are some wines where it is true that if you drink them too soon, you're missing out on the best of them. So I would put price is probably a pretty good indication of how long you should wait. So let's say we're getting over 50 or 100 euros per bottle. Certainly in a big vintage like 16, 20, 19, 22, you probably are missing out on the best if you drink it within the first 5 to 10 years. But conversely, as we talked about, there's so many estates that they don't go for that. They don't go for 50. They go for 5, 10, 15, 20 euros per bottle. And they're supposed to be drunk when they're young and full of fruit. And waiting 10 years is definitely not the right thing to do. So it's using a bit of common sense when you approach them.
Yeah. And then another criticism is people say, you have to be eating with them. They're wines for food. Is there such a thing as a vin de soif, a thirst-quenching wine in Bordeaux?
Yes. I think that there are tannins in Bordeaux. There's acidity in Bordeaux. We are in an oceanic climate, and that's the beauty of Bordeaux. That's why that they can be so incredibly drinkable when they're 10, 15, 20, 40 years old, because they have that acidity and they have that tannic heft that allows them to age. So if you're looking for a very, very simple wine to be drunk young, then you've got to look at the appellations that don't have so much tannins. And it's not just about what's naturally in the grape, it's about how the winemaker wants to make them. So the big difference between a Pauillac and let's say a Bordeaux Superior even if you have 70% Cabernet Sauvignon, let's say, in each of them, you have the natural intensity of Cabernet Sauvignon in Pauillac, but you also have a winemaker who says, you know what, this is an expensive wine, I'm going to macerate a little bit longer, I'm going to get those tannins out, I'm going to really, really build a wine. It's all about building the tannin architecture. And then these guys over here who are spending, wanting to buy make a wine for 5 or 10 euros, they might have lots of tannins, but they're not trying to really build around that. They're trying to build around the fruit. So there is a difference in the approach to winemaking, and I think we forget that a lot. There's this element of the hand of the winemaker is important in Bordeaux, like in everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then when it comes to wine and food combinations, well, give us some of your favourites, and then after that, tell us how you break the rules from time to time, because I think this is another problem with Bordeaux. People think, gosh, this is sort of a region where you have to follow the rules the whole time. Personally, I don't like following rules much. I love breaking them. But anyway, I'm sure you know how to break them even better than I do. So let us into some of your secrets.
Well, I think, so the classic rules of Bordeaux would be this idea of, I don't know, a Saint-Julien with lamb, those kind of classic things. Okay, let's think of some rule-breaking. If you're going to have Sauternes, which is sadly a wine that people don't drink so much anymore, I think if you're going to go with that, my personal favourite, keep it super cold. Even put it into the freezer for half an hour. I'm sure the Sauternes are going to kill me for saying this, but that's what I would think. Put it into a freezer, make it really cold, and then have it either with oysters, so you've got this like salty edge with the sweetness of the Sauternes, or just get a beautiful, beautiful, freshly ripe peach or some really gorgeous piece of fruit. Slice that up, really, really fresh, and then have it with the Sauternes. So I think work about contrasts. If you're going to go Sauternes, all about contrasts. So the other thing that maybe I break the rules a little bit is with cheese. So I think classically red wine with cheese is seen as being older red wine, but an aged red wine with cheese is seen as being the way to go. I would always say white wine with cheese is much nicer. So yeah, go for maybe a 5 or 10 year old Pesset-Léognan Cru Classé de Grave white with a gorgeous piece of Comté. That is, you can't do better.
And what about if you're a vegetarian, or if you prefer vegetable-led food? I mean, I presume Bordeaux whites would go well, but can you also dip into Bordeaux reds with those kind of foods?
Of course, yeah. I eat 90% vegetarian. So I would always be looking for that. So I guess maybe the point with that is think about this beautiful reds on limestone, clay limestone from Saint-Emilion, which can almost have a Musigny, like when they're really well done in a gorgeous vintage, which is a lighter style vintage, then you have this freshness and this mouth-watering quality to them, and they can be absolutely beautiful with a mushroom risotto or with any of those kind of lighter style vegetable dishes. But there are no rules, and saying a very, very rich cep mushroom risotto is so different from a light asparagus. Like with meat, there's a million different flavours for a vegetarian dish. But I would not be too stressed about it. I would think, what do you like? Who are you with? What's the mood you're trying to create? And probably the beauty of Bordeaux is it comes back to this acidity and freshness that there is naturally here. So you have actually much more potential for food and wine matching.